The goal at the end of the day is a broken arrow shaft with a good head still on it that has a story to tell. Let's talk archery, bows and arrows from Alone. Season 11, Episode 5 is played, and by this time you've seen some archery gear in action. I've been receiving some questions. What bow did you take? What arrows did you take? What was your setup? And so I think it's a good time to go over that now. I'm going to start with my bow, and this bow is my baby. I got this bow just before I left for the show, had a few weeks to practice with it, and I'm so glad that I did. Let me first preface this video by saying hunting and killing animals successfully is not all about your bow. It's just about getting a sharp object into the correct place on the anatomy on an animal. That's what it's about. I've shot cheap bows all my life, and I've killed a lot of deer with those, and so it's not just about having a particular bow setup, but this bow made me particularly happy on Alone. I loved it. It was my favorite of my 10 items when I got there. My favorite, just because of what it meant to me, getting my food process started right away by getting the squirrel and using it for bait, getting pike. My favorite item kind of changed as time went by because you just do a lot less shooting, after a while. But this bow made me so happy. I'm going to go over it. Firstly, the brand. This is a Damon Howitt Black Mamba, handcrafted by Howitt, 50 pound at 28 inches. Now I draw a little bit longer than 28 inches. I draw about 29 and a half. And so I may have been drawing 53 pounds when I shot the moose. You could see that it was easily enough. 58 inch bow. Overall length is 58 inch. Now, I love this bow for a number of reasons. Firstly, a recurve bow should have beautiful curves. And this does. I love the sweep of the limbs. I also love the geometry that's going on here on the risers, how it fits in my hand, how it sits, how it handles. I really love it. I went with a 58 inch bow because I wanted one as short as possible. 58 inches is pretty short for a recurve, and I wanted to be able to maneuver through the brush a little bit easier. And I also love the dark, smoky color of this bow. I like that gray a lot better than I like browns and reds. So those are all things that I like about this bow, but what's the greatest about it is just how it performs. All the cheap bows that I've shot all my life, they chunk, chunk, chunk when you shoot arrows. It's loud, noisy, feels like a board. Chunk. There's none of that with this bow. It's just so smooth and quiet. Very little noise. I mean, you feel like every fiber of it is just working with the arrow. That's how I feel when I shoot it. Now, this bow is still pretty dirty right now. Usually, I'm very particular about my weapons. In most cases, I would clean this fastidiously, but I haven't. There's still squirrel blood up here. There's still marks from things. A little bit of mud from my river shore. And I don't know why I've left it that way, but I kind of feel like leaving it that way. Either way, this bow made me so happy, so thrilled, performed so well, and I put it through some very rugged conditions. You know that. And then having it in my hand and letting that arrow fly at that moose in episode 5. Now, this is the second time I've let arrows fly on this moose. I love animals. I value them, I thank God for them every time I take an animal's life, but just being able to take that bull with this equipment in that context, one of my high points, I guess, in life. It was really great. I'm going to talk about my arrows. Firstly, my quiver. You've seen this quiver. This is the quiver that I made as a canteen. You know that it's sealed with beeswax. I want to say that it functioned perfectly and it never leaked, even though I poured pretty hot water in it sometimes. It never melted the wax out, never leaked, and I was so grateful. I think it was my number one valuable preparation mod that I did on my gear because it was so good to be able to drink that cool water. I had a solution for carrying arrows in case my bow quiver didn't work. I'll mention that bow quiver I made is not on my bow now, but it did work perfectly. But in case, I prepared this quiver just in case to be able to accept arrows. Take this broken arrow out, to accept arrows through here. This is like belt loops, kind of like a bandolier would be here across the top, and the arrows go down through, and then they're sticking inside this lower fold pocket. And so I could carry 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 arrows across the outside of this canteen with water on the inside, in case the bow quiver didn't work out well, but it did. In the bottom of my quiver, I have my finger tabs. Gonna go over that real quick. This is just the gear that I made for, this is the gear I use for my archery. These are just like the tips of glove fingers, really, but with the seam run right down the back, and 3 fingers. And this is my shooting tab. This is what I use, but of course when I'm hunting, I don't use it. So I had it on the show, but it stayed tucked in down here. And I never used that on the show. So here's my quiver, here's my arrows. I took carbon shafts, traditional only, by Easton. They're 400 spine. They're 30 inches long. And I fletched them myself with these colors. I thought that these colors would stand out better in the fall foliage because yellow, I typically have yellow feathers and they would blend in with yellow leaves. Turns out that in the North Country, these blend in pretty badly as well. This blue and pink blends in pretty badly as well. It weren't very easy to find. But I took 6 arrows fletched traditionally like this, and I took 3 arrows fletched like a flu-flu. I don't know why I chose those numbers, I just did. So I shot the flu-flus mostly at small game, but also took some small game with the traditionally fletched arrows. I'm going to talk about arrow points. I took big game points and small game points, obviously, but I'm going to talk about this broadhead first. This broadhead is a Kodiak. Now, you might recognize the company more as Grizzly. I think it's their more common point. They sell Grizzly broadheads. But Kodiak is like a same company, but it's built a little beefier, I think, a little tougher. And I really, really love what this arrowhead did. The geometry is what's special about this. So you might notice this long plane of the blade here, and there's a shorter plane up here. And this is a chisel point. It's not sharpened side to side. Now it comes down to a point, but that point is it's not razor sharp, and I think that's so valuable. And let me explain why. When you're shooting at an animal's rib cage, the ribs, if your arrow is needle point sharp, it can stick right in those ribs. Now with a bow like this, not very heavy poundage, if my arrow had stuck in one of those ribs, the arrowhead would have stayed there. Probably the moose would have carried that arrowhead in that rib for the rest of its life. It would have grown a ball of bone material around it. It definitely wouldn't have pierced through the rib and killed it. But with this type of point, this is a chisel point, that cartilage on the outside of the rib is able to move just a slight bit, and this kind of avoids more rib sticking, if you know what I mean. I believe that about it. Either way, this went straight through into the moose, as deep as it needed to get both lungs. This is a single bevel, 175 grain point. It's a left-hand bevel, so obviously on a left-hand bevel, your feathers will be left wing feathers so that the spin and the bevel coordinate. And it's a really tough construction in this arrowhead. For big game points and small game points, I took 4 of these broadheads and 5 small game points for my arrow split, my 9 arrows. I don't have the small game points here to show you. I forgot to bring those out today. But 4 of these broadheads and 5 small game points. Now, here's why you never want to use the factory edge that comes on broadheads. You always want to take your broadheads and sharpen them, hone them down to a razor's edge. And it's because of the way arrows kill animals. You see, bladed weapons like this slice off arteries so cleanly that the hemorrhage that takes place as blood gushes out of there is as fast as possible. All throughout the animal's lungs, all throughout the moose's lungs, there's tubes like this, smaller. Actually, in the moose, some of them were this big, as a garden hose. I'm using this as an illustration. All throughout those lungs were arteries like this, and an edged weapon cuts them off cleanly. Now, why do I compare an edged weapon with other weapons? A gunshot wound. A gunshot wound tears or smashes arteries off, and the ends look more like this after a bullet passes through an animal. So that hemorrhage that's caused can be more quickly staunched by the platelets collecting in the shredded material at the end of an artery, like so. And that means that gunshot wounds, while the shock wave of a bullet can put an animal on the ground very quickly. Sometimes gunshot wounds are more survivable than arrow wounds if they're through vital organs, because of how a bullet tears the arteries like this, and then the blood platelets can collect there and they can cause clotting, and at best the hemorrhage is not quite as fast. Whereas with an edged weapon like an arrow, it cuts the arteries off so cleanly like this that there's very little to restrict or let the platelets gather against, and the hemorrhage is just so fast. So the moose really felt just a prick, just like a willow stub would be as they crashed through the brush. And then it got lightheaded. It didn't know why, passed out, and it never woke back up. That's every bow hunter's goal. It doesn't always happen that way. That is best case scenario, is with an animal if the hemorrhage can be so rapid that they just suddenly get lightheaded and they fall over, they pass out, and then they actually pass away while they're unconscious. So I hope that's been enjoyable and informative. I highly recommend this bow, these arrows, which I got all my arrows and fletching and points and everything from Three Rivers Archery. It's a wonderful supplier. Nobody's paying me to say these things. I'm just telling you because I want you to know where to get good gear, and I want you to know about my gear. And remember, at the end of the day, this is your goal right here. The goal at the end of the day is a broken arrow shaft with a good head still on it that has a story to tell. And this arrowhead right here certainly has a story to tell.